most of us are familiar with design as perhaps a visual medium. The graphics we see, advertising, cars. But I think what's interesting about the context I operate in is design at a decision-making level, at a strategy level. So you can almost think about design as not only a visual medium, but also as a set of principles, a decision-making framework for how we can
Hmm.
make better decisions. So that's really where I'm focused on is like really how do we make decisions as leaders and what are the benefits and attributes of design that can help influence better outcomes?
One of the things that I love about designers is you have such a clear idea about how to frame the problem, like really understanding, like it's we need to reinvent the toothpaste, or we need to reinvent the experience of the car, or we need to reinvent whatever it is, some process. You seem to have, when I say you, I'm speaking of designers I've worked with, really dive into the problem and understand it from all aspects. And in this conversation, I don't know that founders, let's take founders for instance, really look at the problem they're solving with as much rigor as a designer does. Is that, am I overstating?
I've met certainly founders who have designer qualities, but I think something that unifies so many designers is this innate curiosity for
Mm.
what is the world, how does it work, and do we really understand the problem at hand and how we're going to solve it? I think oftentimes we might be faced with constraints that aren't really constraints, and
Mm.
the power of our imagination to reframe how we view the world, right? And so I think that's such a powerful attribute of curiosity, not even using the word design, but just curiosity to break the frame, reframe it, and ask a question that might completely change your understanding of the world and the problem that you're looking at.
I love that answer. Ask the question. I think the thing about designers is they're really good at great questions.
Mhm. The
And
power of questions.
I remember someone saying, it seems like your job, Mark, is just to be someone who asks great questions. Yet I'm not a designer, but I love asking those questions. What is the question that let's go up to organizations that are established. They're multifaceted. Maybe there's a couple of hundred people working there. They're past startup stage and now they're going. Where does what is a designer? If you came in, someone listens to this and goes, "Yep, Gordon, you're right." And so you go into an organization. What are the first couple of things that you are looking for?
Are you asking what is a designer looking for in a large kind of corporate setting? Like what sort
At
of
the C-suite. So if you've been you're convinced by this conversation and you say, okay, and they go to your organization, you have an organization of designers, and they find someone who could come in and help them. What are the
Mm.
kinds of things that they would look at?
I think one thing that's really helpful is to think there is certainly the attribute of the designer. So you mentioned curiosity, imagination, but there's also the design leader, two constructs that are related, but also somewhat distinct. The leader, I think, is something that in business, we all kind of know you got to show up as a leader and know how to drive those results and inspire a vision. And I think it's so interesting to think about when you combine design and leadership,
Mm.
what do we get as a combination of those ingredients? And so I think when companies are interested to learn more about the power of design in the strategy context, it's really asking the question of, think given the composition of the objectives and the mission and vision of the organization, and then the people who are now in those seats to make those decisions,
Mm.
what are the questions that aren't being asked that are
Mm.
so vital to the success of the organization? And I think what's really exciting of what we've learned in the years we've existed is um, at the board level, you're judged on the quality of your perspectives, the questions that inspire thinking. So the gap between a great designer and a great design leader, and then a great board director and a CEO is really in that inquisitive, critical
Mhm.
thinking mind space. And I think at that level, when you're shaping strategy, so much of that lives in the realm of the art of conversation, right?
Mm,
How do you
mhm,
talk to the CEO, the
mm.
board, the stakeholders, the shareholders who all have a say in impacting what the CEO ends up deciding on? And so that medium is a little bit different than, when we're designing interfaces or artifacts. It's now talking about design at the leadership level to use all of those attributes and the power of our imagination to poke and shape and remold and reframe and provide
Mm.
provocations that might change the perspective of the company entirely,
Hopefully.
hopefully for the better.
There's a book, I wonder if you've seen it. It's called The Big Book of Beautiful Questions.
Hmm.
And it's how to frame questions and ask questions and listen to answers. And it's for someone who's wanting to do this and think about how to improve your ability to ask questions, and then how to listen to answers. That's the other part, that a lot of times leaders just have an agenda and they're just going to ask perfunctory rather than really being open. Can you give us an example of a company, you don't have to name a name, where either they started with a designer or they added a designer in? What change happened as a result?
I think in most traditional processes for companies, there's generally a sense of quickly arriving at a solution and testing and getting it out the door as quick as possible. And that kind of temptation can be really seductive, right? We're going to quickly
Mm,
solve the problem and get that out the door. But what often happens is realizing that they might be spending millions of dollars solving for something that doesn't need to be solved in that way, or it's
mm,
been built
mm,
incorrectly. And so I think one of the benefits of a design leader stepping into any kind of situation is actually what I learned is you can do more with less. You
mm,
can reduce waste, you can increase clarity and get efficient because you're investing in really great understanding and discovery. Do you understand the real human insight powering why someone would make the decision to purchase something, to have the motivation to change their behavior? So those are kind of really important aspects of designers coming into any context to really make decision making go upstream further,
mm, mm,
where the
mm, mm.
investment in discovery and understanding then fuels clarity, alignment, everyone getting on board. And then eventually the build and execution process is a lot easier because now you're not fighting over what problem are we solving again? Why do we care about this? Why does a customer care about this? Because you've done that upfront investment. And so I often think of it in from a financial perspective, it's like compound interest. The earlier you
Mm.
invest in these elements of design and discovery, the more interest you're going to get later because you've invested on time and early. Whereas we've seen cases where a lot of teams spend millions to billions of dollars on innovations that actually didn't really go through a great research and discovery process and fall flat in the market. And it hurts the company, hurts shareholders, and no one wants that.
The current environment pays a lot of attention to cultural diversity,
Hmm.
diversity in general. I think that is something that I wasn't paying attention to when I was, at Wavefront doing computer animation software and doing all those things. I wasn't thinking about it. But it feels now that through this kind of Zoom, for instance, and having distributed companies, that there's a cultural appreciation that we didn't have to we weren't as confronted with it as we are now. Let's put it that way. So do you find a sense that maybe Europe or Asia is ahead or behind in this notion of putting design at the C-suite?
Hmm. That's a great question. To be honest, I've spent most of my time right now in the kind of US market for design, but I think what's most exciting to me when I look, back to my experience in, international is the fact that in Asia, they've been adopters of innovation and digital far ahead of us over here in the United States. If you
Mhm,
look at some of the
mm,
notable innovations in China and India, it's incredible, steps ahead of where we're at today from a payments and finance perspective. So even in the European Union, you have, digital passports, right? So
mm,
I think there's
mm,
something
mm.
really interesting about, the acceptance of innovation and culture and how that's fed into the social experience of us as citizens. And where is the United States in that kind of race to figure out, how do we create more innovative behaviors that reflect into the quality of the experiences and really save us from a lot of the pains that we go through every day, like lining up at getting your driver's license, renewing your passport, stuff like that.
I like the word you used just now, social experiences. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I think about if design is a reflection of our inner states. Think about as a society, if we compound that, what is the state of the collective society? And how do all those attributes and personalities and value systems feed into the decisions we make, which then feed into our daily lived experiences, right? And so, design, and to me, is a really interesting way to pay attention to the multifaceted aspects of our human experience and the
Mm,
interactions that then glue us together as a society, whether it's the tool we use, the artifacts and objects that serve our daily needs, to how applications today, social technologies are affecting how we behave in front of people and around people. So I really think about the implications of design choices that happen in rooms that you and I may not be in, have huge ramifications on the social experiences of all of us, right? And so that's why I think it's so important that we think about design and decision making context, and it's not just a, random decision or choice.
I'm I'm curious again on I know you tell us so that you have an organization of designers that you've built. What's the mission of that organization?
Yeah, so the Design Executive Council exists to advance strategic design leadership to the highest levels of business and
Mm,
society. And the vision that we see here is we have a real power to harmonize business and technology in service of humanity. And I say in service of humanity because I think where design leadership has a real power is because we're in those processes in business. We have a real power to bring that human insight to the
mm,
forefront of strategy and
mm,
understanding
mm,
so that everything and all those investments we make in business are in a reflection of actually serving a human benefit, a human outcome, rather than just getting us more addicted to technology and experiences that might just be, a one-stop shop for something, but it doesn't need us to spend, more than a second on it, right? So there are such interesting philosophical views of how what design cares about is often rooted in the human experience, and then how does that translate to how businesses end up making decisions to improve the human outcome and return also benefit, their top and bottom line.
I absolutely love that mission, which is why I wanted you to come in and talk with us. I'm also curious because I have a long relationship with Art Center School of Design and the RISD and SCAD and all the various schools that where designers are coming from. I'm curious, is this message being taught?
I came out of SCAD's design management program during the pandemic. I think a lot of schools are slowly getting up to speed with the business education of designers, right? That's really important. But I would also argue the art and design education of business people. It's that
Mm,
unity of the two dualities, the left brain, right brain, creativity, analytical, art, and science. We need both to drive meaningful outcomes for society and business. And so in my design program, what I really loved was I studied financial analysis. I had to get into spreadsheets as a designer. That's very unusual, but I think that actually
yeah.
led me to eventually starting my own business. But I would also argue business people need to also get more comfortable with ambiguity, with deeper
Mm,
critical thinking. That's not just from the analytical side, but also from the personal kind of philosophical side. So I think the better off we are is when we see these two worlds have
mm,
synergies and fusions so that the business mind is also trained in the creative mind, and the creative mind is also trained in the analytical business mind. So that's the kind of yin and yang I see between these two worlds, and why I think it's not just about design education, but also about business education being more well-rounded.
I would love to hear that there is a class at Wharton that is exactly to this piece that you've just said. What would the title of that class be?
If I was to invent a new class,
Yeah.
hmm,
Maybe we'll get this over to Wharton and we'll pitch it to Ethan Molnick.
I don't know. Is it creative businesses, design businesses? Contemporary business, maybe you don't even need the word design. I think it's just
Mm,
when I think about where we're going as a society, we need contemporary leaders who are multidisciplinary, who are
mm,
holistic, who are not rigid about the disciplines in which they exist, but they're curious to go beyond the fence that they're used to, right? And so when I think about contemporary business, everything I said could be bundled into that, right? Modern
mm,
business.
mm,
And I
mm.
think a lot of businesses are still operating in the old world where, they're really rigid about how they do it, right? And I think there isn't that full embrace of a multidisciplinary perspective. So I would just argue, you might not even need the word design in there. It could just be contemporary businesses, right? Modern businesses.
Gordon, thank you so much for helping us understand how important this is. I can't wait to get this show out to people who could use your words.
Thank you. And you can find us online at Design Executive Council.
Perfect.